A lot of news about Afghanistan at the moment is focusing on whether or not the United States should have withdrawn and whether the withdrawal under Biden has been botched. Evidently, it has been botched. That's why we're witnessing scenes of horror where you see the normally orderly boarding of a plane reduced to a hysterical farrago as a civilization apparently collapses. But I think a more important question is, why were the United States of America in Afghanistan in the first place? If you no longer believe the evidently bogus narratives that countries like America, UK, any colonial power go to war in order to, for some humanitarian imperative in order to help people. We're helping people through war. No one believes that anymore, even if I was making these videos for children. And in a way I am, because I hope children watch them, but I'm also making them for you, my peers, the people that are the same as me, that see the world the same as me, that see through the illusions and the deception and are trying to understand what's really happening within the limitations, within the control that's placed on information and within the censorship that ordinarily is practiced on massive platforms. But one thing that's difficult to ignore in Afghanistan now, when confronted with this humanitarian disaster, when confronted with the reality of US involvement in a foreign territory, when relieved of the idea that countries like, as I say, America, UK, imperial powers, whichever one, I've not got a side, although I have got inbred biases from being an English person, whatever the public narrative is, the reason is always money and profit. Remember, if something doesn't make sense to you, just have a look at that situation and think, well, who benefits from this situation?
We went to Afghanistan almost 20 years ago with clear goals. Get those who attacked us on September 11th, 2001, and make sure al-Qaeda could not use Afghanistan as a base from which to attack us again. We did that.
Before we get into the numbers and who hugely benefited from Afghanistan, let's look at the human reality. 4,400 American soldiers died, 6,300 American GIs and contractors. A reputed $1 trillion of American money has been wasted, a number that none of us can even calculate or hold in our minds unless we're mathematicians or can see a series of zeros reaching off into an imagined horizon. And Britain alone has wasted 37 billion. That's not to talk of the number of Afghan people, because the stuff I've read, them numbers ain't even recorded. Of course, the reasons we're told for these wars is, terrorism, their culture is barbaric, they dress different, they have different ideas around gender, equality, sexuality, ideology. Any bit of cultural and antipathy that can be conjured up through these events is always welcome, always used to stoke the flames. But here are some numbers that might interest you and might tell a story if you use the simple, paradigm or equation that I mentioned earlier. If you or I look at Afghanistan and see a disaster where people are needlessly losing their lives, where a country is being decimated and is in decline and disintegration, public immolation, disaster and emergency, then who could see it as beneficial? Well, let's have a look at the numbers. Advocacy group Public Citizen says entrenching US forces in Afghanistan was the military-industrial complex's business plan for 20 plus years. Hawks and defence contractors co-opted the needs of the Afghan people in order to line their own pockets. A long entrenched war of 20 years, for most people, whether you're a patriotic supporter of the troops or you're a pacifist who's anti-war, that's not a good setup. That's not a good scenario when you look at the recent military history, say just 20th century wars, those, Vietnam onwards conflicts. Anything other than a short, sharp Desert Storm, Falkland-style, jingoistic, bellicose, public image, home front boosting victory has to be seen as a disaster. But to some people, those things are those events, those tragedies, those wastes of human life, those distractions from who we really are, this pursuit of mad ideals for mad ends is hugely beneficial. Here are the profits of the 5 biggest defence contractors over the past 20 years, the period during which the United States of America have been in Afghanistan. And remember, kind of began didn't it, around 2001. And if you want a sort of a deeper and sort of colourful and rather baroque and delightful history of various conflicts in Afghanistan, you might want to watch Bitter Lake, Adam Curtis's amazing series of documentaries on the subject, talking about the Russian conflict in the same territory and their comparable colonial imperatives, even under what some people would call state capitalism, but was sort of commonly known as state communism. So, here are the return stocks of the 5 biggest defence contractors over the past 20 years. Lockheed Martin made a 1,236% return. So for 100 million investment, a billion. I'm not very good at maths, but 1,236% seems like that seems good business being done over at Lockheed Martin. And remember, if your business has as its primary client the government of a country, influencing that government's policy would be essential. If, for example, America was run according to the will of most people, wherever you are, on the left or the right or in the middle or somewhere high pie in the sky, if you were in government, wouldn't you broadly speaking say, I don't want the sons and daughters of America coming home in zipped up bags. I don't want to be getting involved in foreign conflicts unless there's a very, very good reason. And here's one rule we could put in place to ensure no skullduggery. No private enterprise is allowed to profit from this endeavour. Why would you not put that as a bill through Congress? Why would you not put that through the Senate or Parliament or wherever? I'll tell you why. Because those are the principles under which your and my and all countries are run. If you try to undermine those principles, if you even speak publicly about those kind of ideas, you are at risk, and certainly those ideas won't be countenanced, won't be discussed. Again, to cite Chomsky, who I know a lot of you dudes don't like, he say, anything that ain't on the table being discussed by either, because let's face it, there's only 2 political parties, you ain't got no vote on that. That's tyranny. So however much you hate communism, one-statism, just think about what is it you're really voting about and why are those issues so heavily and emotionally charged? Could it be to distract you from the many things you're never able to discuss, never able to vote on, things that lead to the appalling scenes of human indignity and destruction that you've witnessed over the last week, accompanied, of course, necessarily by the philanthropic campaign, can you support these lives in Afghanistan? I'll tell you who should be supporting it, the people that have been profiting from it from 20 years. Instead of you putting your hand in your pocket and forking out $1 or £1 or whatever it is you got that you can barely afford, how about Lockheed Martin with their 1,200% pay for the humanitarian disaster? How about Northrop Grumman pay out of the 1,196% return that they've seen? Or Boeing out of the 975% return that they've seen? Boeing, don't they? Well, no, they make all the airplanes for British Airways, don't they? When you watch those adverts on the telly, the other side of it is, oh, da, da, da. Da, 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 da. You try getting on an aeroplane in Heathrow or Colorado or New York or LA in the way that they're getting on them in Afghanistan at the moment. Remember, these things are on one tiny rock in limitless space. You can't portion up reality in that way. You can't say, here our business is all red carpets, nice hairdos and little starters on a nice plate. You can see which class I travel in. And then over here people are charging a bleeding airport. There's got to be some integrity is the word I'm looking for. Integrity. All elements of reality interwoven and interconnected. Referring to these numbers in The Intercept, John Schwartz said, these numbers suggest that it's incorrect to conclude that the Taliban's immediate takeover of Afghanistan upon the US's departure means that the Afghanistan war was a failure. On the contrary, from the perspective of some of the most powerful people in the US, it may have been an extraordinary success. Notably, the boards of directors of all 5 defence contractors include retired top-level military officers. You know this already, you know how it operates, it's not a coincidence. Jack Merkinson in Discourse said, we did not go into Afghanistan to support its people and we did not stay in Afghanistan to support its people. It is astonishing, given what we know about the monsters that the US has propped up time and time again around the world, that the myth persists that we do anything out of love for human rights. We went in and we stayed in for the same reason. The American empire is a force that must remain in perpetual motion. As an English person, and I respect your country and I respect you as people, I ain't critiquing your nation from outside of it. Do you think British Empire was any better? Do you think any empire is any better? This is the nature of the economic and ideological systems that have been allowed to dominate our culture for too long.
Our only vital national interest in Afghanistan remains today what it has always been, preventing a terrorist attack on America's homeland.
General Dynamics, another massive company, 625% return over the last 20 years. It's been a very profitable 20 years in Afghanistan for them. Raytheon, 331% return. You know, Raytheon, by the way, that's that dude who's like high up, isn't he? Isn't he the defense minister? We've got this guy. He's very unbiased on whether or not to have wars. Good, because we need him. What was your last job? Made weapons and that. Sold weapons, just selling weapons really. Just mostly in the selling weapons industry. Backgrounds in selling weapons primarily. Should we have wars? Well, I don't know. Will the wars require, for example, weapons? Yeah, I suppose so. They have to kill people with them. Yeah, do a war then. Do a war. It's just, I don't know, for some reason, I'm sensing it using my crystal ball and my crystal bazooka. I'm sensing a war would be a good thing. But what about the terrible scenes at the airport? Yeah, I tend not to think about that too much. Some mug can pay for that on the telephone. You can fork out for that. When it comes to paying for the humanitarian disaster, woo, would you like to get involved? It's all of our responsibility. When it comes to extracting the profit, you've just heard the 5 names: Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, Boeing, General Dynamics, Raytheon. Those are the people that are profiting. Those are the people that should pay. Seems simple, doesn't it? So why can something so simple not happen? Because all of your systems, your entire reality, you are some pipsqueak ash just blowing around on the breeze of the mighty power of the jet engines of Boeing, Raytheon. They organise your reality. They organise your wars. They create your human rights disasters, but you pick up the tab. Let me know what you thought of this video in the description. Comment. Tell me what else to watch so as I can learn more. Subscribe to my channel and sign up to my mailing list at russellbrand.com so I can communicate with you directly if I ever need to. If you want to see me live, you can. And if you want to hear me have deep conversations on these subjects, go over to Luminary that you can get from Apple and sign up for my podcast Under the Skin and meditate with my other podcast on the same network, Above the Noise. If you want to watch a free football podcast for some reason just to distract you to leap into the mindless glory of something else, then have a look at Football Is Nice. There's also a channel for that. If you want to see more videos like this, have a look at this one. If you want to see videos that are maybe a bit more spiritual on my side channel Awakening, have a look at this one. Whatever it is you do, don't let this situation drive you crazy and don't believe the lies. Stay present. They caused this war. They should pay for it. Remember the names. Apple wants to check your phone. No, there's absolutely no way. There's no reason I would ever want Apple checking my phone. Look, hear me out. Some people out there, sick, disgusting people, are looking at illicit images of minors and young people, and this has to be stopped. Do you not agree with that? Do you not agree with stopping illicit images being exchanged of young children? Oh no, God, obviously I agree with that. Right, give us your phone, then we're going to check it, do what we want with it. It is only for the illicit images of young people, isn't it? Listen, just leave the thinking to us, yeah?
New controversy over Apple's latest software update, Neural Match. The program, scheduled for rollout later this year, will scan U.S. iPhones for images of child sex abuse.
You know by now that Apple want to be able to check phones for illicit images of children. No one in the world, except for an obvious and hopefully rather small demographic, has any interest in allowing that kind of material to be exchanged. You know, I think we've agreed on that. But I was very interested to hear former Under the Skin guest Edward Snowden, as he's commonly known, talking about this move by Apple and how it would likely be misused. You're surely aware by now that whenever there's a disaster, whether it's a military disaster, a terrorism disaster, a medical health disaster, that it is used to sort of crowbar in legislation that will be beneficial. Now, obviously, the kind of images, and that's, you know what I'm referring to, of course, I'm being careful around the language, that is a moral disaster. That is an ethical disaster. That is a spiritual disaster, a breach on the sacredness of innocence and the principle of consent. But can you trust Apple, a undemocratic, super powerful tech company, to be in charge of having access to your phone? Well, if you ain't got nothing to hide, you ain't got nothing to fear. Oh my God, they can change that at any time. That's what Edward Snowden's saying. That's what I'm suggesting, that it may begin with something that basically every human in the world agrees with, that child pornography is wrong, but it might lead to further kinds of interception and snooping that you might not approve of, particularly the way the world is changing so radically and the way that big tech are operating in correspondence with government. I would be extremely careful about granting them those kind of abilities. This is from Awa Madawi, writing in The Guardian. Apple announced a new set of protection for children features that will look for US iPhones for images of child abuse. One of these features is a tool called Neural Match, which will scan photo libraries to see if they contain anything that matches a database of known child abuse imagery. Another feature scans iMessages sent or received by accounts that belong to a minor. It will then notify the parents when a child receives sexually explicit imagery. Now, of course, I'm a parent. Anyone that has children, your love of children, and maybe even if you don't have children, your love of children is so powerful and so strong that you would almost accept anything to keep your children safe. You would do anything. Do you think it's a coincidence that this is the way that these companies that are dependent on data, dependent on being able to access your information, dependent, of course, in the case of Apple, it's hardware, but it don't hurt them to have access. And then remember, they operate in conjunction with government, and some people believe that relationships between big tech and government goes deeper than anyone would sensibly speculate on publicly. Would you like that kind of nexus to be granted that kind of power, knowing what you know because of the revelations of whistleblowers like Snowden? Do you want them to have more power? Are there not other ways that we can keep children safe and protect children? And when you use something that's emotionally provocative, evocative, and overwhelming, like the safety of children, a sacred principle of most cultures, then it kind of blurs your vision and stops you thinking straight. I have noticed a trend where people use, or institutions or organizations use, areas of moral certainty to enter into more ambiguous areas. This is one obvious example. In order to eliminate child pornography, yes, we want that result. That's a good result. We want to be able to check your phone for anything, but you can trust us only to check for those things. Dodgy. Not everybody is a paedophile. A small minority of people are, but by auguring legislation of this scale, you could use it down the line for anything. Ultimately, anyone is an enemy whose interests do not align with the interests of the powerful. At the moment, your interests do not disrupt the interests of the powerful. If ever they do, you will know about it. So we have to be careful around these ideas. Of particular concern to security researchers and privacy activists is the fact that this new feature doesn't just look at images stored on the cloud, it scans users' devices without their consent. The irony. Essentially, that means there's now a sort of backdoor, steady, into an individual's iPhone, one which has the potential to grow wider and wider. We probably won't even do that one. The Electronic Frontier Foundation, which is a cool name, an online civil liberties advocacy group, warns that all it would take to widen the narrow backdoor. We've got to stop talking about widening backdoors. I'm a professional comedian. I'm working so hard here. To widen the narrow backdoor that Apple is building is an expansion of the machine learning parameters to look for additional types of content. Wow, that's what we'd have to do. So you could just say, and also anyone that's interested in buying this, and anybody that's ever spoken out against this, and anyone that's ever said that, or you could just do what you want once you've installed the basic thing. Once you've set up the circuit, you can put whatever you want down it. That's not a slippery slope. That's a fully built system just waiting for external pressure to make the slightest change. Edward Snowden voiced concerns about Apple's new features. No matter how well-intentioned, Edward Snowden's taking the piss there, isn't he? Because we've spoke to Edward Snowden on our podcast, Under the Skin, available on Luminary from, get this, Apple. And he says he's a dry dude, he's a smart dude, he's been through the ringer. So when he says things like, no matter how well-intentioned, Apple is rolling out mass surveillance to an entire world, he knows it's not well-intentioned, is what I'm basically saying. With this, make no mistake, if they can scan for kiddie porn today, they can scan for anything tomorrow. They turned $1 trillion of devices into iNarcs without asking. Good use of language there from the great Snowden. Ross Anderson, Professor of Security Engineering at Cambridge University and Edinburgh University, says, historically, the idea of scanning customers' devices for evidence of crime comes from China. I remember when iTunes put the free bloody U2 album on my phone. I was like, hey! Nothing against Bono. I like Bono and the Edge and that. But I was like, right, get off my phone. And when you do when you charge it, if you've got it charging overnight, we'll give you a little update. Then the next day, you've got to enter all these things. What's that? I don't know what it is. What's your 4-letter PIN? I haven't got a 4-letter PIN. Why are you asking me? Leave me alone. I just want to be able to text people. I want to be able to email people. And I probably watch a bit too much on YouTube. Just leave me alone. Here, we've given you some U2 albums. Get that down, yeah. This idea comes from China. It was introduced in 2008 when a system called Green Dam was installed on all PCs sold sold in the country. It was described as a porn filter, but its main purpose was to search for phrases such as Falun Gong. Well, I've never liked that Falun Gong over in China, have you ever been near the embassy in China? They're always out there doing the Falun Gong. And the Dalai Lama, they've never liked him either. It also made its users' computers vulnerable to remote takeover. Oh, but you don't think they would misuse that, do you? Oh, look at that thing we were using just because we're so against child pornography, you know. Actually, it turns out any dissidents or anyone who disagrees with us in any way, we can just like take over the computer. Yeah, but we'd never do that, would we? 13 years later, tech firms in China are completely subservient to the state, including Apple, which keeps all the iCloud data of its Chinese customers in data centers run by a state-owned company. Oh, wow. So in China, Apple's relationship with the state, because the state don't play in China, is utterly integrated, and all of the information that Apple has, it shares because it's a different cultural context, so they just do what's allowed. Well, while we're over here in China, we're keeping our American values. We respect liberty and privacy. No, in China, we just do what the Chinese bloody well want because that's what's convenient and expedient for our economic relationships. And I'm not obviously condemning any individuals. What's the point in that? But it's a set of ideals that suggest that we should be bleeding careful about this stuff, no? Until now, democracies have allowed government surveillance in two sets of circumstances. First, if it's limited to a specific purpose. Second, if it's targeted at specific people. Examples of special purpose surveillance include speed cameras, right, and the software in photocopies that stops you copying banknotes. Oh yeah, that's going to work. Here you go, sir. £20 of money. It's black and white. I know. You've probably got cataracts. Oh well, thank you, sir. Enjoy your day. Targeting specific people usually requires paperwork such as a warrant. Apple's system looks like the first type of these, but once it's built into phones, Macs and even watches in a way that circumvents even their security and privacy mechanisms, it could scan for whatever else or whoever else a government demands. These concerns are not abstract, nor are they limited only to countries considered authoritarian. The European Union just updated the law allowing tech firms to scan communications for illegal images, requiring firms to scan text too. In Britain, the Investigatory Powers Act will also enable ministers to order a firm to assist in interception. Your iPhone may be quietly looking for missing children, but it may also be searching for the police's most wanted. Just looking out, making sure there's no pedos about. Oh, I don't agree with that. You shouldn't have said that. Oh, you've not paid your gas bill. Oh dear, there's a photograph of your bum in there. All right, get out of there. Sorry, I was just trying to help. Politically, the tech industry has often resisted pressure to increase surveillance, but now that Apple has broken ranks, it will be harder for other firms to resist demands by governments. Child protection online is an urgent problem, but this proposal will do little to prevent these crimes while opening the floodgates to a significant expansion of the surveillance state. No one in their right mind disagrees with measures to protect children. But anybody in their right mind can see that big tech, in alliance with government, invading privacy of individual people without their consent is a huge major problem. And it isn't overly cynical to suggest that they might use deliberately emotive ideas that cut through your ability to think rationally in order to facilitate the kind of legislation that will advance their agenda to have total dominion and surveillance potential in allegiance with the government. These relationships, as we know, are corrupted and corruptible, even in instances where they are as yet not corrupt. So I think we should be incredibly circumspect and should resist that kind of change, frankly. If you disagree with me or if you agree with me, comment below. Please give us a like, give us a thumbs up, share this thing around if you want to. Please subscribe to this channel, and if you need a little break, why don't you go over to my Awakening channel where you can get meditation and well-being advice. Sign up to my mailing list at russellbrand.com. And if you enjoyed deep conversations, even like the one I had with Edward Snowden, go over to Luminary on, ironically, Apple, and you can listen to that. It's a subscription model. Also, there's guided meditations there. If you want more free content, why don't you watch this video on a similar subject that you will enjoy? And if you need to unwind and learn something about spirituality, have a little look at this. Thanks for following us. How do we take power back? By voting? By protesting? No, you simply take the power back. In this conversation from my podcast, Under the Skin, on Luminary, available on Apple, Khan Ross, former British government employee who was so disgusted with the government that he turned into an anarchist, explains how the principles and systems of anarchy can be applied to provide us with an alternative way of running our own systems, running our own lives, rather than living within structures that can never change because they themselves require the structures to remain permanent. Have a listen.
You don't agree with sort of municipal, public or what nationalised ownership of railways and things like that?
Not by the state, no.
Not by the state.
I don't believe in state ownership, no. I believe in local ownership and communal control and, full democratic control of institutions and utilities like railways or banks or whatever. And maybe a centralised government could start us on the way to that, but they couldn't complete the task. Absolutely not.
But it could be transitional in the same way that socialism was transitional to...
Well, I don't hear that in the Labour Party's current
programme.
No,
nor do I, mate.
Don't hear them talking about a transitional programme.
I mean, you're right, it's because it isn't there. But could... I say we, the people, us, could we stand to say, look, we want to stand in this election, and what we propose is after this, we decentralise power wherever possible.
Well, there are political parties that do that. I mean, there is one in Denmark that's proposing that, called the Alternative.
Always the bloody Scandinavians, isn't it? Yeah. What is it, the air, the pornography?
It's proportional representation, to be precise, that allows it in Scandinavia. A first past the post system obviously militates particularly against small parties. But in that circumstance, and indeed, frankly, in all capitalist societies, I think the idea of getting elected to make changes is a naive one. I think we have to create change ourselves. And I don't think we take over Tesco's, we create an alternative Tesco's. I believe not in overthrowing structures, particularly violently, because I think that is a kind of change that just invites reaction and legitimizes the reaction. I believe in constructive alternative systems that are better, that attend to people's needs. And I think, we're very much stuck in a culture of protest and voting and aggro on the internet. And none of these methods will give us the society we want. The only thing that will give us the society we want is constructing things, institutions, processes, forums, companies, changing the nature of the company itself, our social relations. From the micro to the macro is constructing that ourselves, and that takes work. And in Occupy, I saw, a lot of people were happy to come to the square and protest. It was a much, much smaller group of people who took the time to go away and spend literally years trying to construct something that would endure. So it's work.
Yes, it's work, isn't it? It's curious because sort of polarity suggests an integral relation to the other which you're trying to overthrow. Like if you're involved in the kind of, you're connected to it. You can't break it with a protest movement. That's fascinating.
Well, you legitimize it, actually. I think protest legitimizes the thing it protests against. It says that you are meaningful, you matter, when in fact, actually, these institutions that are iniquitous, exploitative, dominant, socially domineering need to be just ignored, because whilst we create something better, they will dissolve away, they will evaporate, because we've created something that is so much more compelling and exciting and human and just better. Yes. And that is a model of change in our current circumstance. It doesn't require you to go out in the streets and throw yourself under tank tracks. It doesn't require you to throw Molotov cocktails. It doesn't require you to vote for somebody who's, might or might not deliver the change you wish to see. It requires something else, actually just a pragmatic cooperation with colleagues who share the same ambition to build something. And that is really fun. I mean, it's actually really satisfying to try and build something new. It's difficult, and you'll fail. You may fail 100 times. It may take us 1,000 ships to launch. We may need to launch 1,000 ships for one of them to get through. But if that one gets through, then we can succeed.
That Occupy movement was like that bloody punk gig that Morrissey and New Order and everything was at. Like it was like this moment, Occupy, that seems to have spawned a great many thinkers, theorists, activists, ideologists. It ripples us. It's very much felt, I think, today.
Yeah. It's a wave. It's a wave of something. It was a real cry out that things are not right. And in America, where I was living at the time, it made inequality a political topic. That is of extraordinary importance. That even Obama couldn't talk about inequality until Occupy came along and made it a legitimate topic of discussion. So that was a huge achievement in itself. But then we now need to reflect on where that protest took us. It didn't create the transformation we all want to see. Now we need to be asking ourselves what would.
When listening to people talk about capitalism and say the state, the system, call it what you will, these relationships between powerful institutions, corporate, national, international, what I am astonished by and afraid of is the remarkable efficacy in consuming counterculture, how counterculture is promoted into the mainstream, how these things become sort of eviscerated and turned into emblems. So, like, this idea you have, and which I think I've read stuff about in Buckminster Fuller, that guy, create alternative systems and simply begin living in accordance with them. I wonder, like, what I suppose, even though you say this, you know, that anarchism is inherently not about a vision, because a vision proposes a kind of fascism, I suppose it has stitched into it. Here is the utopia to which we must head. No, not like that. It means, doesn't it, like on the ground or where we are in the moment, that what we have to do is simply begin to organise things differently. Like go, let's set up a radio station or a supermarket or whatever it is that's not run like that. And like, what's that? The Spanish example,
Mondragon.
Well, that's a bloody good Spanish accent, mate, that you just swapped out.
Fake. I don't really speak Spanish.
Well, for that moment, by God, you had me fooled.
Yeah.
Mondragon, I suppose they're all right, aren't they? What is Mondragon? What is it?
It's a huge cooperative company, a conglomerate of cooperatives that is, I think, Spain's 10th largest company now. It covers insurance, banking, manufacturing, based in the Basque region. And again, it demonstrates that a cooperative economic model is entirely practical and effective. I mean, it's not problem free. And I think one of the other important things to understand about anarchism is it doesn't claim the human is perfect. It doesn't claim that these things will come without trouble. It takes a great deal of effort and it will take imperfection, and it won't necessarily work as well as we might wish it would work, but it is plausible. I think once you take away the sort of aesthetic beauty, the sort of claim of aesthetic perfection from political change, then it actually becomes more reachable. It's dirty, it's rough, but it's manageable. It's not something that is a beautiful geometric design. It's not a romantic painting. It's something that's actually just about our everyday rough and ready circumstances. And actually we can change those things much, much, much more easily than we think. We've been told we can't change things. And I think the left in particular has got awfully good at explaining cultural phenomena as a reason change doesn't happen, rather than going out and actually trying it. I think postmodernism has been a rabbit hole that the left has disappeared down into, whilst others have taken power. And I think...
Tell me what you mean by that, please, how postmodernity has impaired the left.
Well, I perhaps rather foolishly have introduced a diversion here, but basically that rather than take on power and rather than create a new kind of society, in the 60s and 70s, a lot of left-wing thinkers went into the academy and worked on postmodernism, worked on the meaning of signs and words, the meaning of
Foucault, Derrida, even like just sort of understanding,
understanding power rather than practicing it, and believing that understanding was a way of subverting it, when in fact it isn't. It's just a way of analysing it. And actually, what we've got to think about is how to subvert power. They've got it, we haven't. How do we take it back? That's, in a sense, the only real question that matters.
They've got it, we haven't. How do we take it back? Simply by taking it back.
Well, if you enjoyed that video, maybe you'll consider subscribing to Luminary. It's available on Apple. Let me know what you think in the comments. If you got a lot from this video, maybe watch this video. It's very, very similar. If you need a little bit of meditation, now go over to my side channel, Awakening with Russell Brand. Consider getting my podcast. There's meditation on there and great conversations. Subscribe to my mailing list at russellbrand.com right now.